The night wind carried the scent of pine and smoke across the endless Dakota plains, whispering through the tall grass like a secret only the earth could keep. The sky stretched wide, heavy with stars that shimmered against the black horizon. The silence was broken only by the soft rustle of the river nearby and the faint cry of a coyote in the distance. Somewhere within that silence, a young woman rode alone, her heart pounding harder than the hooves of her weary horse. She had left everything behind: her home, her family, her safety, and every step forward now took her deeper into land she was never meant to cross. Her shawl clung tightly to her shoulders as the cold pressed against her skin. But it wasn't the chill that made her tremble. It was the fear of what lay ahead and of who might already be watching her. She had heard the stories about this land, about the Lakota warriors who rode like shadows under the moon, their faces painted with the spirit of the hunt. To outsiders, they were spoken of as danger itself, men who could appear from nowhere and vanish like smoke. But to her, the danger was not the men themselves, it was what her heart had begun to feel since the moment. She had seen one of them for the first time. It had been days since that moment. Yet she couldn't shake the memory. The village had been quiet when she passed through, searching for shelter. And he had stood there strong, watchful, with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. His presence had unsettled her, yet she couldn't look away. There was something in the way he moved, something that told her he belonged to this land in a way she never could. She had tried to ignore it, to push the thought aside and ride on. But now fate had brought her back into his world, and this time there was no escape. The moonlight glimmered faintly on the river as her horse slowed, exhausted from the journey. She dismounted, lending it to the water's edge, and knelt beside it. Her hand shook as she cupped the cold water and brought it to her lips. She thought she was alone, but the feeling of being watched settled on her shoulders like a weight. Slowly, she turned her head, her breath catching in her throat. Between the trees stood a figure, tall and still. As if carved from the very earth, the Lakota warrior stepped forward. Silent as a shadow, the firelight from his torch flickering across his face. His expression was unreadable, yet his gaze pierced through her like an arrow. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them tightened, charged with something that neither of them could name. Her first instinct was to run, but her body refused to obey. "You should not be here," he said finally, his voice low and steady. It was not a threat. It was a warning. She swallowed hard, clutching her shawl. "I mean no harm," she whispered. "I'm only passing through." He studied her for a long moment before his eyes softened, just enough to show he believed her. "These lands do not take kindly to strangers," he said. "Especially not at night. I had nowhere else to go." Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. "The storm caught me near the ridge. I lost my way." He stepped closer, the soft sound of his moccasins pressing into the damp soil. His presence felt like the wind itself, gentle yet impossible to resist. "Then you are lucky I found you before the others did." "Others?" she asked, her pulse quickening. He looked toward the dark line of trees, his jaw tightening. "There are men who ride under no banner. Not Lakota, not white. They take what they wish, and they kill for sport. You should not travel alone." She hesitated, her fear mixing with confusion. "Then what will you do with me?" The faintest smile touched his lips, though it never reached his eyes. "For now, I will keep you safe." He motioned toward the trees, and she followed him cautiously, unsure whether she should feel relief or dread. The forest swallowed them, the shadows closing in. The night grew darker, colder, yet the sound of his footsteps ahead gave her a strange sense of security. He didn't look back once, yet somehow she knew he was aware of every move she made, after what felt like an eternity. They reached a small clearing where a fire burned low. His horse stood nearby, its reins tied loosely around a branch. He gestured for her to sit near the flames, and though she wanted to resist, exhaustion won over. She sank down, stretching her cold hands toward the warmth. He removed his fur cloak and draped it over her shoulders without a word. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. "Why are you helping me?" He crouched beside the fire, his face calm but distant. "Because once someone helped me." There was something in his tone that told her not to ask more. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Still, she couldn't stop stealing glances at him, the sharp lines of his face, the quiet strength in the way he moved. Everything about him seemed carved from both pain and pride. Like a man caught between the old world and the new. "You said others might come," she said softly. "Are they close?" "They were tracking a caravan earlier this week. If they followed the river, they could be near." "Then we should leave," she urged. He turned his gaze toward her, eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. "We will, but not tonight. You would not survive the cold." She looked away, her heart thudding painfully. She wanted to trust him, but fear still lingered deep inside. She was alone in the wild with a man whose world was not her own, whose every movement spoke of power and danger. And yet, beneath all that fear, something else stirred, something she didn't dare name. As the fire burned low, she began to drift between wakefulness and sleep. Somewhere in that half-conscious haze, she felt him move closer. The sound of his breath was steady, the warmth of his hand brushing against her arm as he adjusted the cloak. Her eyes opened slightly, and she whispered, "If you touch me, there will be no turning back." His hand froze, his gaze locking with hers in the dim firelight. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. He could see the fear and the defiance in her eyes, and something in him shifted. Slowly, without a word, he drew back, his expression unreadable. Yet the tension between them only deepened, heavy as the air before a storm. The night stretched on, quiet and fragile. Outside the circle of firelight, the forest whispered with unseen life. Far in the distance, a wolf howled, its cry rising and fading into the night. She sat awake, watching the shadows dance across his face, wondering what fate had bound her to this moment. When dawn began to rise, the sky turned pale gold over the plains. She stood, wrapping the cloak tightly around herself. He was already awake, his bow slung over his shoulder, his horse ready. He looked at her once more, as if weighing a choice he hadn't yet made. "You should go back," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "And if I don't?" He paused, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "Then you'll have to live with whatever comes next." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The wind stirred between them, carrying the faint smell of rain and earth. Then he turned toward the trees, his voice low but firm. "The path you choose now will change everything." She didn't know whether he meant it as a warning or a promise, but as he mounted his horse and offered his hand to her, she knew one thing for certain: nothing in her life would ever be the same again. And somewhere deep inside, horizon, when they began their journey across the plains, the air was cool, the light soft and golden, stretching across the tall grass that swayed like an ocean under the morning wind. She rode behind him, her hands gripping the edge of the saddle, still wrapped in his fur cloak. The warmth of it lingered from the night before, carrying his scent, a mix of smoke, leather, and something wilder she couldn't quite name. Every time the horse shifted beneath them, she felt the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. He hadn't spoken since dawn. His focus remained forward, eyes scanning the land, as though he could read every whisper in the wind. There was a sharpness in him that never seemed to rest, a quiet alertness that made her wonder how many years he had lived this way, half in peace, half in battle. She wanted to ask his name, to know something about the man who had appeared from the dark to save her. But the silence between them felt sacred. Like breaking it might scatter the fragile trust they had begun to build. The plains stretched endlessly, dotted with clusters of trees and the faint trace of smoke far to the west. He guided the horse toward the foothills, keeping close to the shadows. She could tell he was avoiding open ground, perhaps still wary of the men he had spoken of the night before. After some time, she gathered enough courage to speak. "You said those men ride without a banner? Who are they?" He didn't answer at first, his jaw tightening. "They were once soldiers," he said at last. "Some from the forts, some from the rail camps. When the war ended, they found killing easier than living." "Do they hunt your people?" she asked softly. "They hunt whoever they can," he replied. "Sometimes they sell what they take. Sometimes they burn it to the ground." She looked down, her stomach twisting. And you've fought them before? He nodded once. Too many times? The words were quiet but heavy. She could hear the memory in his voice, the kind that left scars deeper than any wound. The more she looked at him, the more she realized he was not just a warrior. He was a man caught between two worlds that would never truly meet. By midday, the land began to change. The soft grass gave way to rougher ground, scattered with red stone and wild sage. They stopped by a stream to rest. He knelt by the water, filling a leather pouch, while she wandered to the edge of the clearing. The sky stretched endlessly above her, the kind of open vastness that made a person feel both free and very small. You said, I should go back, she said quietly, turning toward him. But you didn't mean it, did you? He looked up, his eyes unreadable. You think I wanted you to follow me? I think you could have left me by the river last night, she said. But you didn't. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, slinging the pouch across his shoulder. If you stay with me, you'll see things you can't forget. Things no one should. I already have, she murmured. The way she said it made him pause. There was a sadness in her voice that he recognized too well. He didn't ask what she meant, though he wanted to. Instead, he motioned for her to follow. They rode until the sun began to sink again, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. As they neared the base of the hills, he slowed, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. She followed his line of sight and saw faint smoke rising between the trees. There, he said, that is where my people camp. Her breath caught. Your village. He gave a small nod. What remains of it? She could hear the weight in those words. Whatever had happened there had left more than ashes. As they drew closer, she saw the outlines of lodges made from hide and poles, the figures of women moving quietly between them. The laughter of children carried faintly on the wind. The air smelled of sage, smoke, and something ancient. When they entered the camp, all movement seemed to stop. Every pair of eyes turned toward her, wary and curious. The warrior dismounted, helping her down with a steady hand. Though his touch was brief, it sent a shiver through her, half from fear, half from something she didn't understand. An older man approached, his hair streaked with gray, his expression stern. He spoke in Lakota, and though she didn't understand the words, the tone was sharp. The warrior replied calmly, gesturing toward her. The man's eyes softened, but only slightly. He gave a curt nod and turned away. What did he say? She asked once the man left. He said you should not be here, the warrior replied. But he also said you may stay for now. She looked around, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes still watching her. They don't trust me. They have their reasons, he said simply. He led her toward one of the lodges, motioning for her to go inside. The space was small but warm, lined with furs and the scent of wood smoke. He handed her a small bowl of broth. You should eat, he said. You've had a long ride. She took it gratefully, sipping slowly. What will happen now? He sat across from her, his gaze thoughtful. That depends on what you are running from. Her fingers tightened around the bowl. You think I'm running? I know that look, he said. It's the same one I wore when I left my home. His words settled heavily between them. She looked into the fire, the flickering light making shadows dance across her face. I was supposed to be married, she said at last. But the man my father chose for me was cruel. I couldn't stay. He studied her silently, the faint light of the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. And you think you can escape that by crossing into our land? I didn't plan any of this, she said quietly. I just wanted to be free. He leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. Freedom always comes with a price. The sound of drums began to rise outside, slow and rhythmic, echoing through the valley. She set down the bowl and turned toward the doorway. What's happening? He stood, listening. A council. They will speak of what to do about the riders. The same men who were near the river? Yes, he said. They grow bolder each season. He stepped toward the door, then hesitated. Stay inside. Some will not be kind if they see you again tonight. She wanted to protest, to say she wasn't afraid, but his tone left no room for argument. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone with the sound of the fire and the distant beat of the drums. She sat there for a long time, staring into the flames, her thoughts spinning. The warmth of the lodge couldn't chase away the unease that crept through her. She knew she had stepped into a world that didn't belong to her, and yet something about it felt strangely right, as if she had been meant to find it. When the door flap rustled, she turned sharply. He stood there again, his expression darker than before. "They are moving," he said. "The riders." They were seen to valleys north. Her heart pounded. "Are they coming here?" "Not yet," he said. "But they will. They always do." "What will you do?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "What I must." His words carried a quiet finality that made her chest tighten. She wanted to say something to stop him, but before she could, he reached for his bow and turned to leave. She followed him to the edge of the camp, the night sky stretching endless above them. "You can still go," he said softly, without looking at her. "There is a trader's trail that runs east by the river. If you follow it by morning, you might reach the fort by nightfall." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you here." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand what's coming." "Maybe not," she said. "But I understand that you saved me and I can't walk away now." For the first time, he looked at her not as an outsider, but as something more, a choice he hadn't expected to face. The firelight flickered between them, the wind carrying the scent of rain and danger. He didn't move, didn't speak. Then, somewhere in the distance, the sound of a horse's cry broke through the night. Both of them froze. He reached for his knife, his eyes narrowing toward the darkness beyond the trees. "They're closer than I thought," he whispered. Her pulse raced. "What do we do?" He glanced back at her, the intensity in his gaze both fierce and protective. "Stay close to me," he said. "From this point on, there will be no turning back." The wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the first hints of smoke and thunder. The night that followed would decide everything. The wind picked up that night, sweeping through the valley with a low, mournful sound that carried across the camp. The horses grew restless, shifting in their ties, and the firelight flickered wildly against the sides of the lodges. She stood near the entrance of the warriors' shelter, her heart pounding as the sounds of the night pressed in from all directions. The storm that had been promised in the distance was drawing closer, and with it, something darker, something human. The warrior moved quietly beside her, checking his weapons, his movements quick and practiced. Every muscle in him seemed coiled and ready, like a bow drawn tight. She wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but the look on his face stopped her. There was no fear in him, only focus, the kind that came from a life lived on the edge of danger. From outside came the sound of voices, low and tense. Men from the village gathered near the fires, speaking in short bursts of Lakota. She couldn't understand their words, but she didn't need to. The fear in their eyes said enough. Mothers were pulling children inside, and elders were preparing arrows and spears that had seen too many battles. When the warrior finally spoke, his voice was calm but hard. "They're close," he said. "Closer than we thought."
"How many?"
she asked, her throat dry. "Too many for one fight," he said. "But we'll make them think twice before crossing this valley." She looked at him, trying to read his expression. And if they don't? He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw the weight behind his calm. "Then we fight until the end." The words sank into her like a stone. She could see the quiet acceptance in his eyes, the understanding that he had made peace with the danger long ago. But she hadn't. Not yet. Her world before had been full of rules and walls, but never war. Now, standing here in the middle of the plains, with the sky turning black above her, she realized there was no safety left in the world she once knew, as the camp prepared for battle. She noticed the older man from before, the one who had looked at her with suspicion. He was speaking with a group of younger warriors, his tone sharp. The warrior she had followed stepped toward him, and the two exchanged heated words. She couldn't understand the language, but she could feel the tension crackling in the air like dry lightning. Finally, the older man pointed toward her, his eyes narrowing. "What is he saying?" she asked as the warrior returned. He looked away briefly before answering. "He thinks you brought this danger with you, Her stomach twisted. That's not true. I know, he said quietly. But fear makes men believe strange things. Then let me help, she insisted. There must be something I can do. He studied her, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. You don't owe us this. You've saved my life, she said. That means something. He nodded slightly, as though he wanted to believe it but wasn't sure if he should. Stay near the fires, he said at last. If the fight reaches the camp, find the old women and go with them. Don't run into the woods. They'll find you there. I understand, she said, though her voice trembled. The night deepened, the stars swallowed by clouds. The wind carried the scent of rain mixed with smoke. From somewhere beyond the ridge came the distant echo of a gunshot, sharp and cold against the vast silence. The entire camp froze. The warrior's hand went to his bow. They've started, he said under his breath. He moved quickly, calling to the other men in Lakota, his tone low but commanding. Within moments, the camp transformed. Fires were doused, shadows moved like ghosts through the trees, and the women gathered the children inside the shelters. She could barely keep track of where he went, only glimpsing him in flashes of torchlight as he prepared for what was coming. She crouched near the edge of the lodge, her fingers clutching the fur cloak tight around her shoulders. Her heart felt like it might burst as the sounds grew nearer, the thundering of hooves, the shouts of men, the crack of rifles. The night erupted into chaos. From the tree line came figures on horseback, their torches blazing as they rode hard toward the camp. Gunfire tore through the dark, lighting the world for a heartbeat at a time. The warriors met them with arrows and cries that echoed across the valley. The air filled with smoke and dust, earth trembling beneath the clash. She pressed herself against the ground, trying to stay small, but the battle felt everywhere at once. In the faint light, she saw the warrior moving like the wind itself, his bow singing, his movements swift and sure. Every motion spoke of years of survival, fighting for a world that was slipping away. And then, through the confusion, she saw one of the raiders break through the line, riding toward the center of the camp. He carried a torch, its fire trailing behind him like a serpent. He was heading straight for the shelters. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. She ran. The warrior saw her just as she left the shadow of the lodge, his shout lost in the storm of sound. She reached for a stick of wood from a dying fire and swung it as the rider passed, striking his arm. The torch fell, sputtering into the dirt. The rider turned his horse sharply, fury flashing across his face. But before he could raise his weapon, an arrow struck him clean through the shoulder. He fell hard, his horse fleeing into the night. She turned and saw the warrior standing behind her, bow still raised. His expression was fierce, his chest rising and falling with each breath. I told you to stay back, he said, his voice low. You told me to survive, she said, breathless. That's what I'm trying to do. Before he could respond, another explosion of sound came from the ridge. More riders. The warrior's face tightened. They're coming from both sides now. Can we hold them off? She asked. He shook his head. Not for long. The camp was falling into confusion, against smoke rising, shouts echoing, children crying. The old man shouted orders, his voice nearly lost in the chaos. The warrior turned to her, his tone sharp but urgent. There's a cave beyond the stream, he said. Follow the path through the trees until you see the rocks. Stay there until I come for you. She grabbed his arm. I'm not leaving you here. He looked at her, his eyes fierce. You have to. I won't, she said firmly. For a moment they stood in silence, their faces inches apart, the world collapsing around them. Then he took a step back and handed her his knife. If you stay, then stay close, she nodded, clutching it tight. The night raged on. The attackers pushed forward, their torches lighting the sky with a hellish glow. The warriors fought back with everything they had, their voices rising like thunder. She moved beside him through the chaos, ducking behind fallen branches, helping the wounded when she could. Each moment felt endless, each breath borrowed from fate. At one point she saw the old man fall to his knees wounded. Without thinking, she ran to him, dragging him toward cover. The warrior appeared beside her again, his face streaked with dirt and blood. He lifted the old man easily, carrying him back to safety. As the first light of dawn began to show, the attackers began to retreat. The rain finally came, hissing against the burning torches and turning the earth to mud. The sound of gunfire faded, leaving behind only the crackle of dying fires and the broken rhythm of breathing. She looked around the camp at the shattered lodges, the wounded, the smoke curling into the sky. The cost of survival lay heavy in the air. The warrior stood beside her, his bow hanging loosely in his hand. His eyes followed the trail of the retreating riders. "They'll come back," he said quietly. She swallowed hard. "Then we'll be ready." He turned to her, his gaze steady. "You shouldn't be here for what's coming." "Maybe not," she said, her voice soft but sure. "But I am." Something flickered in his eyes, a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Before he could answer, one of the scouts approached, speaking quickly in Lakota. The warrior's expression changed. He looked toward the north, where the hills met the rising sun. "What is it?" she asked. "They've taken someone," he said, his tone hard. "A boy, my brother's son." The world seemed to freeze again. She felt the weight of his words, the quiet fury that filled the space between them. "What will you do?" she whispered. He looked at her, the storm still burning in his eyes. "I'll bring him back," he said, "even if it means I don't return." Before she could speak, he was already mounting his horse, calling for the few who could still ride. She stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Then I'm coming with you." He stopped, glancing back at her with something unspoken in his gaze. "If you come with me now," he said, "there will truly be no turning back." The rain fell harder, soaking the earth as the riders disappeared into the mist. She stood there, her hands still gripping the knife he had given her, knowing that her choice had already been made. The fight was far from over. The road ahead would demand everything they had left. The rain had stopped by the time the first light of day touched the hills, but the air still carried the weight of the storm. The land looked bruised, scattered with the remnants of battle-broken arrows, torn leather, and the dark stains that no rain could wash away. Smoke from the dying fires curled upward into the morning mist, and the smell of ash hung heavy in the valley. She stood among what was left of the camp, watching as the survivors moved quietly, their faces pale with exhaustion and grief. The children clung to their mothers, and the men who remained gathered what little could be saved. But her eyes kept drifting toward the ridge. Where the warrior and his riders had vanished hours before, she hadn't slept since he left. Every passing moment without word felt like a stone pressing harder on her chest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint sounds from far away, a cry. A rustle but none that told her what had become of him. She tried to stay busy, helping the wounded, fetching water and mending torn hides, but her mind refused to rest. The boy he had gone after was more than family. He was one of the last links to the tribe's future. If they lost him, it would break more than one heart. The old man, still weak from his wound, sat near the fire as she brought him a bowl of warm broth. His sharp eyes studied her quietly. "You care for him," he said in his rough voice. She froze. "I owe him my life." "That is not what I asked," he said, his gaze steady. "Your eyes follow the wind when he is gone." She looked down, unable to speak. There was no sense in denying it, though. She didn't know what name to give the feeling that had grown between them. He had saved her life, yes. But he had also shattered something inside her, something that once believed in safety and distance. The old man sighed, wincing as he shifted. "He walks a dangerous path," he said. "He carries the ghosts of many battles. And now he goes into the land of men who know no mercy." "Then I should have gone with him," she said quietly. His eyes softened. "And what would you have done?" "Fought them with your heart?" Her throat tightened, but before she could answer, a sound came from the edge of camp, a cry from one of the scouts. Everyone turned as a rider appeared on the horizon, galloping hard toward them. The horse stumbled as it reached the camp, foam on its flanks, and the man on its back nearly fell before the others caught him. He was one of the younger warriors who had ridden with the Lakota. His face was streaked with blood and mud. "They have him," he gasped. "They have the boy. The others half are dead." A chill swept through the camp. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. "And the one who led you?" she asked. "The warrior." The young man's eyes darted toward her. "He lives," he said, "but he stayed behind. He said he would find the boy alone." The old man closed his eyes, the lines on his face deepening. "He has gone to die." She shook her head, her hands trembling. "No, he'll come back." The old man looked at her with a kind of sad understanding. "If you believe that, then go to him." She blinked, startled. "You would let me leave?" "I would not stop you," he said. "But you must understand what waits beyond those hills. The men who took the boy, they are not soldiers. They are the kind who kill for the pleasure of hearing a cry. If you go after him, there may be no road home." She glanced toward the ridge again. The sky there was darker, the clouds gathering once more, as if the earth itself mourned what was coming. Her pulse quickened. "Then I'll go before it's too late." The old man gave a slow nod. "Take the black horse," he said. "It knows his scent." She didn't wait to think. Within minutes, she was riding hard across the valley, the wind whipping her hair and the ground rushing beneath her. The world narrowed to the rhythm of hooves and the sound of her heartbeat. The hills rose like shadows ahead, jagged and dark, and every gust of wind carried the echo of danger. She didn't know where he was, only that she had to find him before the men who took the boy ended everything by the time she reached the ridge. The sun had disappeared behind thick gray clouds again. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and gunpowder. She followed the faint trail of hoofprints through the mud, stopping now and then to listen. Every broken branch, every distant sound made her heart lurch. Then from far ahead, she heard the sharp crack of a gunshot, followed by another. She urged the horse forward faster until the sound of the shots turned into shouts. The land opened into a rocky clearing bordered by cliffs. She pulled the horse to a stop and saw him. He was there, crouched behind a fallen log, his bow drawn. His arm was bleeding, but his focus didn't waver. Across the clearing, 3 men moved between the trees, rifles glinting in the dull light. She spotted the boy too, tied near one of the horses. His face pale and frightened. Her first instinct was to call out, but she stopped herself. Instead, she slid from the saddle and crept forward, her breath shallow. The warrior shifted slightly, catching sight of her. For a brief second, their eyes met. Shock flashed across his face, quickly replaced by anger. He shook his head sharply, motioning for her to go back. But she didn't move. The ground was slick with rain, and every step she took felt like walking into fire. But she couldn't turn away now. One of the men spotted movement and fired. The shot hit the ground near her feet, spraying dirt. She ducked behind a rock, her heart racing. The warrior loosed an arrow, striking the shooter in the shoulder. Another man shouted, returning fire. The echo of gunfire rolled across the cliffs. The boy cried out, struggling against his ropes. The sound pierced her chest. She glanced toward the warrior again. He had moved closer, his jaw set, his movements fast, despite the blood running down his arm. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but his eyes burned with a fierce, steady light. Then she saw something, a rifle lying near the body of one of the fallen men. Before fear could stop her, she ran for it. The warrior turned just in time to see her move, his shout drowned by the gunfire. She dropped to her knees, grabbing the weapon with shaking hands. It was heavier than she expected. Her fingers fumbled on the trigger, but she steadied herself, aimed, and fired. The recoil knocked her back, but the shot hit true, grazing one of the raiders who had turned toward the warrior. He stumbled, clutching his arm. The warrior seized the moment. Lunging forward and driving his knife into the man's chest, she scrambled to her feet, rushing toward the boy. The ropes were tight, but she managed to cut through them with the small blade the warrior had given her. The boy fell into her arms, terrified, but alive. "Go," she said urgently. "Run to the trees," he nodded, bolting toward the edge of the clearing. She turned back in time to see the last of the raiders raise his rifle toward the warrior. Without thinking, she shouted his name. He spun just as the shot rang out. The bullet grazed his side, knocking him to the ground. Rage and fear surged through her. She raised the rifle again, her hands trembling, and fired once more. This time, the man fell, the sound of the gun echoing into silence. For a long moment, everything stopped. The only sound was the wind sweeping through the grass and the quiet panting of the horses. She dropped the rifle, her knees weak, and ran to where the warrior lay. He was conscious, his breathing sharp but steady. "You shouldn't have come," he said through gritted teeth. "I told you I wouldn't let you face this alone," she said, tears in her eyes. He tried to push himself up, wincing as pain rippled through him. "You saved the boy," he said quietly. "That's what matters." She looked toward the ridge where the child had vanished into the trees. "We have to go. More might be coming." He nodded, though his strength was fading fast. She helped him to his feet, wrapping his arm over her shoulder. The rain began to fall again, soft and cold. Every step felt like a battle, but they moved together, one breath at a time, till they reached the horses. She helped him mount with effort, then climbed onto her own. The valley stretched out before them, shrouded in mist. Behind them, the clearing was silent, except for the whisper of rain on the stones. As they rode into the storm, she felt the weight of what had just happened, pressing deep into her chest. They had survived, but the cost hung between them like a shadow. The warrior's blood stained her hands, and the look in his eyes told her the danger was far from over. Somewhere behind the hills, more riders would be gathering, drawn by the sound of gunfire and the promise of revenge. She could feel it in her bones. The story was not yet finished. The road ahead would demand everything they had left, and when it ended, nothing would ever be the same again. The storm followed them for hours, rain hammering against the horses and washing the blood from the ground in sheets of gray water. The warrior leaned heavily against her, his strength dwindling with every mile, but neither of them slowed. The boy clung to her horse's mane, eyes wide with both fear and awe at the pair who had saved him. They moved through the misty valleys, their breaths clouding in the cold air, hearts beating in unison with the rhythm of their desperate flight. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shadow in the trees set their nerves on edge, yet they pressed on. Driven by determination stronger than fear, by mid-morning, the storm began to ease, leaving the plains wet but calm. The horses slowed, exhausted, and she guided the warrior to a small ridge overlooking a wide, quiet river. The water shimmered in the weak sunlight, and for a moment, the world felt almost peaceful. She helped him down, easing him onto the damp grass. The boy slid from her horse, running to the warrior's side. He looked up at him with the trust and relief only a child could show, and the warrior's hand rested gently on his head, an unspoken promise of protection. She knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his side where the blood had soaked through. "You're going to be all right," she said, though her own voice carried the weight of uncertainty. The warrior's jaw tightened, but he gave her a faint nod. "They'll not follow us here," he murmured. "The river and the cliffs will hide us for now." She looked at him, the ache of fear finally mixing with something warmer. "We've survived this," she said. Together, he allowed himself a brief, tired smile. "For now," he said quietly, though the weight of the night still pressed on his shoulders. They spent the rest of the day in silence, tending to wounds and helping the boy rest. The warrior's arm was wrapped carefully, and he moved slowly, every motion a reminder of the close call they had survived. Yet beneath the exhaustion, a sense of fragile safety settled over them. The immediate danger had passed and the valley was calm. Birds returned to the trees. The gentle rustle of water over stone became a soothing rhythm. As evening fell, the boy slept between them. She sat near the warrior, brushing mud and blood from his face. He flinched at her touch at first, but gradually allowed it, as if her presence reminded him of the life he had been fighting to protect. "You stayed with me," he said at last, his voice low and raw. "I couldn't leave," she replied softly. "Not after everything." He looked away, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Few trust easily," he said. "Even fewer allow themselves to care." "I do," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "I trust you." The warrior's gaze finally met hers, steady and unwavering. The tension that had bound them through the nights and battles began to ease, replaced by something warmer and unspoken. She realized in that moment that the fear and danger had drawn them closer, had forced them to see what truly mattered: connection, courage, and the choice to stand with one another even when everything else demanded retreat. Night fell fully, and the stars returned, shining above the wet plains like distant watchfires. The warrior and she sat close, the boy nestled against her chest, breathing quietly in sleep. She traced patterns on the warrior's forearm, feeling the pulse of life that had been so nearly extinguished. And she thought about everything that had led them to this point: the long ride across unknown land, the fire and gunfire, the rush of terror and relief. All of it had led here, to a place where survival and trust intertwined. "Will the others come back?" she asked, her voice soft. "They might," he said after a pause. "But we've made them think twice. And now we know the land better. We know each other." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the boy. "And the boy? He will live," he said simply. "He is safe. That is enough for now." The night stretched on in quiet reflection. They spoke little, allowing the sound of the river and the rustle of trees to fill the space. In the stillness, she felt the truth of their journey, the fragility of life, the inevitability of danger, and the rare moments of human connection that made survival worth every struggle. By morning, the valley had dried, and the sun illuminated the wet plains with a soft, forgiving light. The warrior rose slowly, testing his strength. He moved with caution, but the edge of exhaustion had dulled into endurance. She helped him mount, and together with the boy, they began the journey back toward their camp, toward the people who had been waiting and hoping for their return. Along the way, the warrior spoke of the land of his people, and of the traditions that had shaped him. He told her about the ceremonies of the Lakota, about the way each season carried its own lessons, and how the lessons of courage and survival were passed from one generation to the next. She listened, absorbing the knowledge and realizing that the world she had fled into was more complex and beautiful than she had ever imagined. When they returned to the village, they were met with cautious relief. The boy was reunited with his family, their gratitude and tears mingling in the air. The elders nodded at her with respect, acknowledging her bravery and the courage it had taken to follow the warrior into danger. Even the old man who had first questioned her presence gave a small, approving nod. The warrior rode beside her through the village, and though there were whispers and curious glances, he seemed calm. There was no need for words. The respect between them was understood. The immediate threats had been survived. Now the quiet work of healing and rebuilding could begin. Days passed and the rhythm of life returned to the village. Fires burned for warmth and cooking. Children laughed again in the open spaces, and the warriors repaired what had been broken. The bond between her and the Lakota warrior grew stronger, forged in the fire of danger and tempered by the shared experience of survival. Every glance and gesture carried meaning, every moment a quiet acknowledgement of the trust they had placed in one another. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, they sat by a small fire together. The boy slept nearby, finally at peace. She leaned against the warrior, his arm resting around her shoulders, steady and reassuring. "We made it," she said softly. "For now," he replied, his voice carrying a faint edge of caution. "The land always tests us." She smiled faintly, understanding. "And we will meet it together." He looked at her, eyes dark and honest. "There is strength in that," he said, "and something else. Something that can't be taken away." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn low. The night carried the quiet whispers of the plains, the wind through the grass, the distant call of an owl, the faint murmur of the river. Life had returned to the valley, fragile but enduring, and in that endurance they found a kind of peace as they rose to enter the lodge. The boy tugged at her cloak, looking up at her with wide eyes. She knelt, gathering him into her arms, feeling the warmth of life and the promise of tomorrow. The warrior followed, steady and strong. Walking beside them as they crossed the village, she realized then that the journey had changed her. The fear, the chaos, the moments of near loss, they had all carved themselves into her heart. But so had the courage, the trust, and the quiet moments of connection. She had learned that survival was not just about escaping danger, but about choosing whom to stand beside when the world turned against you. The warrior looked at her once more, and for the first time, there was no tension in his gaze, only understanding, respect, and the unspoken acknowledgement that they had faced the possible and emerged stronger as night fully descended over the plains. She felt a sense of calm she hadn't known before. The boy slept peacefully, the village hummed softly with life, and the warrior remained close, a steady presence in the darkness. The danger that had driven them together still existed beyond the hills, but for now, they were safe, and in that safety, she realized something that went beyond survival. Sometimes the greatest battles are not fought with weapons, but with courage, trust, and the choice to step forward even when the world offers only uncertainty. The night stretched on, quiet and full of possibility. The plains were vast, wild, and untamed, yet within their expanse lay the promise of hope, resilience, and connection. They had crossed the point of no return, faced the storm, and emerged changed but alive. And as she looked at the warrior, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The stars shone above like distant guardians, and for the first time in many nights, she felt the weight of fear lift. The journey was not over, but the heart of it the courage to stand. The choice to trust, and the bond forged in firewood carry them forward. And in that moment, she understood the meaning of the words she had whispered long ago. There truly was no turning back. But with him by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The plains were quiet, fire embers glowing faintly, and the night embraced them in its calm. They were survivors, and more than that, they were together. And that, she realized, was enough. Top of form, bottom of form.